The overwhelmingly majority of the world uses the metric system, yet the United States still uses the imperial system. So why doesn't the US switch and use the metric system? Well, the answer to that is pirates. Yes, pirates. During its early days, pirates prevented the young nation from adopting the metric system. So, buckle up, buttercups, and let's find out why pirates are to blame for the US not adopting the metric system. Here's what happened. The American Revolutionary War ended in 1783. Barely a decade later, by 1793, the United States was still a brand spanking new nation, and it needed standards for weights and measures. Not all states were using the same standards for weights and measurement. New York was using the Dutch system. Other states were using measurements based on English units. Quite a few were using a mix of not only English units, but also French and/or Spanish units. Interstate commerce was a mess. At the time, Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State. During the late 1780s, Jefferson had spent a lot of time in France and was a Francophile. By 1793, France was in the middle of its own revolution and was implementing a new decimal-based system of weights and measurements. He well knew Charles Maurice de Talleyrand-Périgord, who was simply known as Talleyrand. Talleyrand championed the metric system, and in 1790 started pushing for its adoption in the French Assembly. Thomas Jefferson was intrigued by the metric system, mainly because it is a decimal-based system, making it easier to use and understand. So, French scientist Joseph Dombey was dispatched to the United States. With him, he carried two objects. One was a 1-kilogram copper weight called a grave. The other was a 1-meter-long ruler. As side notes, at the time, 1 meter was defined as 1 of 10 millionth of the length of a meridian line from the equator to the North Pole, with the meridian line running through Paris, of course, instead of through Greenwich, as it is in England. At the time, 1 gram was defined as the mass of 1 cubic centimeter of water, so 1 kilogram is the mass of 1 liter of water. Joseph Dombey's ship was sailing towards Philadelphia when it was hit by a storm and blew off course far to the south. He ended up in the Caribbean. And guess who hangs out in the Caribbean? Like me, you probably answered, Pirates of the Caribbean. Well, actually there were all sorts of pirates hanging out in the Caribbean. Dombey had the misfortune of running into and being captured by British privateers. British privateers were sanctioned by the British government and were legally allowed to attack and harass and even steal enemy ships. At the time, both the United States and France were enemies of England. I guess the British were still sore about losing the American Revolutionary War. The British privateers stole Dombey's metric objects and sold them off. They threw Dombey in prison on the small island of Montserrat and held him for ransom. Unfortunately, no one paid for his ransom and he died in prison. So no standardized weights and measurements were adopted throughout the United States, and the interstate commerce mess continued. In 1832, the U.S. federal government finally adopted the U.S. Customary System, which was based on the British Imperial System. However, in later years, many efforts were made to switch the U.S. to the metric system. The Metric Act of 1866 was passed, and Congress authorized the use of the metric system. Each state was supplied with their own set of metric weights and measurements. However, its adoption met resistance. By this time, the U.S. customary system had become ingrained, and the American public found the U.S. customary system more relatable. American industrialists and businesses complained that it would be too costly to switch to the metric system. By the 19th century, there were much political upheaval and turmoil around the world. Even the metric system fluctuated a little bit. Today's kilogram is not exactly the same weight as the grave, that copper object that Joseph Dombey tried to bring to the U.S. back in 1793. On May 20th of 1875, the United States, along with France, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Spain, Italy, the Ottoman Empire, and many other countries signed the Meter Convention, which was an international treaty that created a system of metric standards. Funny how England was absent and did not participate in this convention. Come on, Britain, how long can you hold a grudge? American businesses and industry pushed back. They again argued that switching to the metric system would be too expensive and that American infrastructure would be harmed. The Mendenhall Order of 1893 marked a decision to change the fundamental standards of length and mass of the United States from the customary standards to metric standards. So, officially in the U.S., a yard is not defined as 3 feet or as 36 inches. Instead, a yard is 0.9144 meters. Likewise, pounds, inches, miles, and so on are all defined by their metric equivalents. By the mid-20th century, the world's economy was becoming more and more globalized. If you wanted to do business internationally, you had to use the metric system. The United Kingdom switched to the metric system in 1965 because they wanted access to more European markets. In 1975, Congress signed the Metric Conversion Act into law. The act encouraged the use of the metric system, but did not require it. However, this time, big business in America did see the value in going metric. Due to operating internationally, many big American companies such as IBM, Ford, Xerox, and GM had already switched to the metric system long before 1975. Afterwards, most big American corporations followed suit. Likewise, due to collaboration with fellow scientists abroad, the American scientific community had also been using the metric system long before 1975. Hence, the eggheads at NASA and the American scientific community suffered a big embarrassment in 1999 when they crashed the Mars Climate Orbiter onto the Martian surface because of a mismatch of two measurement systems. Actually, I would blame the orbiter's manufacturer, Lockheed Martin, instead. NASA was using the metric system, whereas the dum-dums at Lockheed Martin were still using the U.S. Customary system. Technically speaking, America is already a metric country. All federal agencies are required to use the metric system. All consumer and food products are required to have metric labeling on the packaging. Most American factories, or, what is left of them, already use the metric system in manufacturing. So, the United States is slowly getting there inch by inch.
Thank you for watching. Hope you found this video informative and entertaining. Please subscribe, like, share, and comment. We do like to know and hear your feedback. And if you have the means, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get early access to our videos, and where we post bonus material. Till next time, this is Geeky Tidbits saying cheers and have a good day.